Hello, and thank you for joining the podcast Emergency Minute. Your host is an emergency medicine physician who brings over 20 years of experience in healthcare. Dr. Parente will take you through some of the trending topics and challenges faced in the ER and all of healthcare. Join in the fight against misinformation. And don't forget to follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente. Now, here's your host, Dr. John Parente.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Season 3 of Emergency Minute. Happy New Year. How the hell are you? So I appreciate everyone for following me last year. We had a good season, did 6 episodes, so a little bit of a drop-off in the number of shows, but hopefully not in the quality. I can't believe we're starting year 3 of Emergency Minute. It's been a lot of fun. I wanted to share a couple of statistics with you that I thought were somewhat hilarious and interesting. This is our 25th episode. One more, I get a free set of steak knives. And we are in 29 countries. I had a total of 162 minutes of wasting your time last year. So that's good. Top 50%, it turns out, on Buzzsprout. I wanted to see where I was being played at. Apparently mostly North America. I've got 0 plays in South America. I kind of feel bad about that. I have quite a bit of following in Europe. In fact, Germany is like my second most listened country here. And then a little bit in Asia, even in Africa. All right. For those of you guys listening out in Oceania, much appreciated. Hard to believe that the reach goes this far, but here we are in 2025. Happy New Year. What have you guys been up to? Very excited to talk to you guys about some things this year. I have some good shows out on the radar. We're going to talk about some things this year. One of the shows I want to do is, can I have an abortion in 2025? Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about this, especially because it's been switched from the federal level to the state level, and we're going to talk about that. And no, I'm not going to tell you if I think you can get an abortion or if you should get an abortion. I'm just simply going to talk about the medical issues surrounding that. A lot of information out there, people putting out there. So, oh my God, I had an ectopic pregnancy. They wouldn't care for me and they let me die in the waiting room. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Also, we're going to talk about CPR and DNR because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what the DNR status means. And this will probably primarily play more to the people that live in the state of Ohio because I don't know what the state-by-state rules are regarding that topic, but nonetheless, that will be something that we're going to talk about as well. So what are we going to talk about today? Today's topic is going to be why I became a doctor. And we're going to talk a little bit about how I became a doctor, which is slightly different, but obviously there's some overlap there, but mostly why I became a doctor, and then what has happened since then in my 20-year career that has either changed or modified the way I feel about things and the way I feel about taking care of people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I've had a lot of push for people requesting this because they want to have more of a personal connection with me and this podcast. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do on the podcast and kind of open up to you guys into my personal life and discuss the road I took in order to get to where I am here today. But before I tell you why I wanted to become a doctor, I'm going to tell you how I became a doctor. Now, admittedly, there's going to be some overlap, but come on now. I can't give you the reason why I wanted to become a doctor and hence the purpose of this show with the first 2 minutes of the show. Otherwise, no one would listen after that. No one's probably listening now. So anyways, like any good writer, I'm not going to set the stage on how I became a physician and then finish it off with why I became a physician. Anyways, I digress. After that, I'm going to discuss what's going on in healthcare today and how that's impacted me. So how did I become a doctor? Well, big shout out to my parents. Truly would not be here today without them. From the day I was born, the installation of values, faith, the importance of family, knowing the difference between right and wrong, being able to state that definition of integrity, of doing the right thing when no one's looking. And I think these are the things that created my core values. They shaped who I am and who I would become. And ultimately, I think it just made me a kind person. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people laughing out there that have, worked with me over the years and they're like, you're kind. I am a kind person. I can give examples. One example I will give you is kind of reflective of who I am and who I was in grade school is that we would play football at recess all the time. And there was always kind of a friend of mine. I was kind of friends with everybody. I wasn't like really in a clique at all. And one of the kids was one of those kids that just kind of gets picked on all the time and just wasn't real popular with everyone there. And I always felt bad for him. I always had a soft spot in my heart for him. So like we would go out and play football at recess, and lo and behold, he was always the last kid picked when it came to picking football teams on either side. So, there were times when I became the captain and I was allowed to pick the football teams that I would pick him first. I know, silly story, but that just kind of gives you an idea of like how I've always rooted for the underdog. I've always helped those that maybe can't help themselves, and gives you a little insight on how or why I wanted to become a doctor. So in addition to these core values, the other thing that I think my parents did a great job of sort of inspiring me was just motivation. My mom worked full-time job and was full-time mom in order to send us to private schools because that was important to her. She felt that education in our particular area was superior to the public schools at that time. And I do think that was true at that time in that region. It may not be true everywhere. But Dad's working multiple jobs, and pretty much I got to see my father at nighttime when he was done working one or two jobs, or on Sundays watching football, which is why, the Browns, the Browns are so near and dear to my heart, because that's what I did. I grew up, obviously watching that with my family, and it was part of what we did on Sundays. Now part of this was inspirational because I saw how hard everyone worked. I saw how hard my father worked, especially because he did a lot of like construction and put in floors and carpeting and things like that. And I can remember my mom saying, if you don't want to work that hard, then you better do well in school. And I can't explain why, but for some reason that message hit home even at a young age. And I know that's a challenge for a lot of parents out there. And it's something that I hope I can install into my kids' hopes and dreams there. I hope they learn and they see just me grinding countless hours here, and hopefully don't go into healthcare. Hopefully they go into business. But I digress. But it wasn't just motivation. I think it was fear. I didn't want to sweep floors and pick up rocks the rest of my life. Doing physical labor, that kind of thing really wasn't for me. And I saw that for my family. And it just, for some reason, it resonated. Hey, I better do a good job in school because I don't want to do this. God bless, like my father. The guy's the toughest guy I know. Cheers, Pops. But anyways, I think I saw them trying to create this better life for us than they themselves had. And that really shaped who I became from a fear standpoint, but also from a motivational standpoint. Now, when it came to schooling, I was always good at math and science. I won't bore you with any of the details or the awards or anything like that I won, but let's just say I'm very fortunate. God gave me the ability to use the vast majority of my brain. And I always kind of knew that I would be in some type of field, science or math, or, in this case, healthcare. Now, early on, I did struggle a little bit with English, which is a little bit hilarious for anyone that knows me because they know my grammar prowess and just general savvy of the English language. This has definitely morphed into one of my strengths in life, but early on, it was a struggle because I hated reading. I remember my mom even bought me Sports Illustrated for Kids, hoping that it would make me start to read more. I think it worked. I don't know. I guess it worked looking at where I'm at today. I'm moving on to high school. The biggest thing that high school taught me, a shout out to Padua Franciscan High School, love that place, was the importance of being a well-rounded individual. I will always love that school because I think it did a great job of shaping the individual, not just the grade, the number, the metric. And I did pretty well in high school. I finished 7th in my class, but I guarantee those 6 kids in front of me worked 10 times harder than I did at their GPA. My focus was really on becoming a well-rounded individual. And I'm not saying that's not what their focus was. I could just tell you that was mine. And it was in high school that I kind of learned to grind. And that's where, going back to that childhood I had of working hard, working with my father, picking up those rocks, sweeping those floors of those houses he was working at. It was in high school that I got a real job and was also, in school taking honors classes, AP classes, etc. And, a lot of my friends were flipping burgers at fast food restaurants, and no disrespect to them, but my first job was at a hospital and I was working in dietary. I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh, great. Now he's going to talk about working in dietary in the hospital. How the hell does that have anything to do with him becoming a doctor? Well, don't you worry. I'll get there. But working in dietary helped shape who I am today because it really showed me the hospital from the ground up. And it also taught me the importance of process. And I love process. I love process improvement. And I've used that. I've sort of love of process and understanding of its importance in management of the ER. And that's why I've been a director for my entire career, because I understand throughput. I understand process. And I think I started to learn that early on in the assembly line of dietary. And I started off with the easiest job, coffee, right? Pretty hard to mess up coffee when you just pour coffee in a mug and you throw it on the patient's tray. But hey, the reality is there are a lot of moving parts. You had to understand if the patient was on a cardiac diet, they can't have caffeine. If they're diabetic, you can't give them sugar. You got to give them sweet and low. If they're lactose intolerant, you have to give them a non-dairy creamer. So eventually I became the best at running the coffee station. And then next up was the salad station, and so on and so on. And so eventually what this led to is me becoming the checker. So the checker was often one of the hardest jobs because you sat at the end of this conveyor belt with these trays being fired at you, and you had to make sure that every single thing that was ordered and cross-reference that with their diet and make sure that everything was aligned for that particular patient. Soft foods, diabetic, full liquid versus clear liquid. And if you found an error, you'd have to either stop the line or have someone throw you a milk or, whatever, and you'd had to get whatever it was and swap out whatever was wrong on that tray. So it was a big process thing there. And that's where I learned not just about the hospital, but the importance of having these processes and good training. God bless those ladies in the cafeteria at Southwest General. Big shout out to them. They took me under their wing and really helped mold me as a little 16-year-old boy at the time. But it helped me realize that if I had good training, I legitimately felt like I could do anything. Now, simultaneously, while I was working in dietary, my high school sweetheart at the time was friends with the nursing director in surgery. This was at the same hospital. So ultimately, I kind of had a leg up on applying to become like a nurse's assistant in the pre-op and PACU or recovery in surgery. And in order for me to get enough hours, I was actually working in both jobs. So I would literally work in dietary and then go work in surgery or vice versa. I was working 2 jobs a day, and I'm pretty sure I was the only person in surgery that was 16, 17. I was 17 years old. And I think this is really what catapulted me into becoming a doctor. Now, again, I would draw back on my experience of that training. And I just figured, I'm going to be the hardest working person in this surgery department because I'm the least qualified person to be here. And I became very skilled as a nurse's aide. And that's where I sort of developed my support and admiration for nursing that's really important to me and is in my core. And yeah, it was during this time that every one of those nurses told me, hey, when you're a doctor, you better be nice to us. And I'm glad they did, but they didn't need to. Because I wasn't going to be that guy. The way my parents raised me, the shaping of the high school and the values that I had of just being a kind person, I saw the way these surgeons treated these nurses. And that's not me. That's not going to be me. So I did take these jobs with me into college, and I kind of started to transition out of dietary and work primarily in surgery. And while honestly, if I could go back and do it again, I wish I had more time in my college years to my friends were partying and being goofballs and that kind of stuff. I worked a ton in the hospital. And I think it definitely helped shape not just my work ethic, but again, I kind of learned how the hospital works from the ground up. And I learned what happened in surgery. I learned what happened during surgery, anesthesia. I learned what happens before the surgery in the pre-op area. I learned what happens in the recovery room. So how patients get admitted. So I think that was a huge part of helping me understand healthcare that was probably, above a lot of my colleagues when I eventually got into medical school. Now, first, I ended up going to John Carroll University. Shout out Blue Streaks, JCU Blue Streaks. And the main reason why is because they had one of the best reputations around for having the highest rate of helping kids get into medical school. And that was my goal at that time. Now, understand, getting into medical school is a very competitive road. It's very difficult to get into medical school. Just ask your dentist. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to try the veal. Just kidding. Well, sort of kidding. This is the oldest medical joke in the book. So I won't bore you with the details of college, but I did continue to work at Southwest. At the end of the day, that's exactly what happened. I went to school, I worked, I was able to finish college, and I worked a ton at the hospital, which gave me more experience than 99% of the people applying to medical school. And shout out to John Carroll. They did a great job of preparing us for that medical school application process. And anyone who's been through it or knows someone that has, getting into medical school, it's almost more grueling to apply to get into medical school and do all the things than it actually is to go through medical school. You apply at dozens of schools. It takes months or years of your life to prepare for all this. It's crazy amount of money to do all this stuff. You have to take the MCAT, which is one of the dumbest tests on earth. It's thousands of dollars for all this stuff. I can't exactly, remember the number of schools and the money, but I just remember that this was a very significant portion of my time and money. My family didn't have a lot of, resources or money at that time. And I knew that this was important. I had to not mess this up. And I do remember my first medical school interview out in California. I went out with my father, and he basically dropped me off for the day and picked me up at the end of the day. And we drove down to Laguna Beach and San Clemente, and his buddy had a restaurant, Augustino's, right on the water. And we just ate like kings. We even took a trip down to San Diego. We saw UC San Diego, which if you ever get a chance to see that campus, it's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's the only trip I ever took with my dad one-on-one as far as far away and that kind of stuff. I'll never forget it. It's one that I cherish very deeply and was an amazing bonding time for me and my father. I'll never forget it. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I got into the medical school in California. Well, remember this crazy process. I mean, this was one of the happiest days of my life. I knew I was going to become a doctor. Now, the side story is these med schools, they have to play games just as much as we're playing the games. And they have to try to squeeze as much money out of you as possible. So I had to secure my spot in California for $1,500. And this was, of course, non-refundable. Now, I had 7 other interviews lined up, but there's no guarantees. You don't know if you're going to get in or not. So you have to pay it. You have to pay and lock in your spot. And it's like an insurance policy. I knew I didn't want to go there, but if that was the only school I got into, then hell yeah, I was going to go there. But, trying to explain that to my Italian-American father was a bit of a challenge. God bless my mom for pulling off that amazing feat. I did go on a few other interviews, but at the end of the day, once I got into Ohio University, it just felt like a great feel for me. It was a great fit. I continued to work in the hospital, which is kind of unheard of for people that are in medical school. I mean, nobody had a job. It's hard. You have like textbooks bigger than my head. You have thousands of hours of lecture and studying and group studying But I kind of draw back to my experience in high school and college, juggling multiple hard courses, working 1 or 2 jobs. And I know that working in a hospital at that time, they had moved me to anesthesia assistants. I knew this would help propel me, faster than any of my medical school colleagues. And to be honest, like when I was in school, I was a pretty average student for medical school, maybe slightly above average, but these are some really smart kids that are running around me, that were running circles around me when it comes to like actual intellect. Now, clinically, I feel that I could meet or exceed anything that they were doing. I was very confident from a clinical standpoint, and that's kind of carried me throughout my career. I may not be the smartest doctor that's ever taken care of you, but I guarantee I'm outworking whoever else is out there. The thing that propelled me over the top was my 3rd year of medical school, working with a physician and a team of medical students and doctors, and we're rounding. So that's where you go around and you see the patients and you discuss their cases and their treatment and their progress and that kind of stuff. So I'm standing over this patient and their families in the room, and there's like 1,000 people in this room, and this physician just starts pimping me. Now, pimping me is probably you can't say that today, but back in the day, that's when a doctor just starts grilling you. What's the treatment for this? What's that? What's the side effect of this medication you're worried about? And they just start kind of grilling you on the spot. And this was a process that helped us learn because you were scared shitless. So she tries grilling me in front of this patient. I don't remember the exact question. It doesn't really matter because I froze and I was a complete idiot. I did not know enough to take care of people. And this was like one of my first rotations in my 3rd year of medical school. And so while I had done well and I had, gotten average scores on the test and I'm passing and I'm like, okay, this is going well, put that into a hospital and I was a complete idiot. And I'm like, I need to be better. I need to work harder at this. I need to expand my knowledge base. And I think it's hard for people to understand that you truly are a thimble under the waterfall when you're in medical school, and there's just so much information being cast upon you, and it's really hard to then just apply that clinically. Like you can't just like flip a switch. But it was that piece of humble pie that I crammed down my throat that really made me kick it into gear and work 10 times harder. So after kicking it into gear and starting to really, really try to apply book knowledge to clinical relevance, I wanted to do anesthesia. And this was no surprise because I worked in anesthesia for years at the hospital. I understood it. I loved it. It was my first love in healthcare. I read the entire anesthesia textbook cover to cover. Yeah, I was that nerd. And I would do anesthesia rotations. And these guys were like, you have more experience than some of our like 2nd year residents. And so they let me do a lot, which was really great. I'm very grateful. And I'm also very grateful to the anesthesiologists, all the physicians over at Southwest General Hospital. Those guys really took me under their wing when I was in, college, and they, even in medical school, they knew that I was pursuing that path. And boy, they let me do a lot. They taught me a lot and just gave me a huge leg up. That was really cool. And what's interesting about this is, and people said, how did you get into emergency medicine? I don't really know. I don't know if you're a person that believes in God. I guess it was just sort of an epiphany. He just kind of handed it to me. And I just woke up one day and said, I want to do emergency medicine. And what's interesting is that the people that know me best in my life were like, oh yeah, we could totally see that. Yeah, you shouldn't be an anesthesiologist. Your personality is much better fitted in the emergency department. So that was kind of crazy. So I quickly rerouted all of my rotations, and I got to start working in Akron City Hospital at SUMA, and I did a rotation there. I did a rotation at Akron Children's ER. That was quote unquote my peds rotation. So I was able to kind of finagle that. And then the other part was working at Akron General. So for 3 straight months, I was at Akron Hospital, where all of the people kind of knew each other. And these were some of the best ER programs around. That was kind of my introduction into emergency medicine. Now, there's no chance at all I would have gotten into Akron City Hospital, which is ultimately where I did my residency down at SUMA before it blew up. Not the hospital, the residency program. It's a long story. But anyways, the only reason why I got in is because I outworked everybody. I'd show up to my shifts an hour early. I never left on time. I left late. I would see a million patients there. I just looked at it as every patient I saw was an opportunity to learn, but also an opportunity to hopefully impress somebody at Akron City. And I'm very grateful for this because I know the director, he really didn't think much of me. And that's fine. Like I'm man enough to say that. He really wasn't that impressed with me. And it's hard to be impressed with somebody when they have, I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's like 1,000 kids that applied and there's 7 or 8 residency spots. Like that's it. So it's hard to stand out when there's that many people applying. The fact that I got an interview is a miracle. But I think out of that many people that applied, there was like 60 or 70 interviews for these like 7 spots. So even then, you have like a 1 in 100 chance of getting in. Even with the interview, it's still 1 out of 10. So it's still not very good. But I'm grateful for the residents that spoke up. There's something called a ranking list where we all sit around and we say, okay, we need to move this guy up the list. This guy had a red flag, so we're going to move him down the list or her down the list or whatever. And you kind of look at their scores and you kind of put this big list together, and that's how you rank potential residents. And I know now that those residents really went to bat for me and said, no, this kid's going to outwork everybody. You got to put him up higher on the list. So that's how I got in, and that's ultimately how I got into emergency medicine. Now, the reason why did I want to do this? I've now talked to you about how I became a doctor. As far as why, I think it's a culmination of things, right? We talked about core values and being kind. We talked about my sort of love for science and for math, obviously being very driven. But if I had to put it in one singular moment, I would tell you the story of Parente Mall. Now, Parente Mall, I don't even know if it's still there anymore. Dear Lord. I was there for whatever reason to go shopping, obviously, and I stopped at a Dairy Queen. And I'm not sure why this resonated with me, but it was just one of those life-changing moments that I'll never forget. And there was a boy there who was working that had Down syndrome. This boy had such a smile on his face. What better job out there is there in the world than serving ice cream to people and making them happy? That's a great job. If I could make the kind of money I make in healthcare serving ice cream, I'd do it tomorrow. But here he is living his best life, smiling, passing out ice cream to people, and, doing the best with what God gave him. God bless him. And, of course, here comes these kids. They coming over and just complete assholes, making fun of him, mocking him. Oh, he's retarded and all this stuff and just being jerks. It just struck a nerve with me that I'll never forget. And I remember feeling so bad. I went from feeling so happy for him that he was, serving ice cream and passing out ice cream and smile on his face. And you could see how crushed he was that these kids, these other boys, were making fun of him, because he has a chromosomal deficiency. But he's still human. He's still a person. He still has feelings, emotions. He's still a real person. And it really crushed me. It crushed me. And I remember I drove home and I remember I told my mom, I want to take care of people. And I really want to be able to help those that cannot help themselves. And that's what emergency medicine often is. And that is why I became a doctor. So what's changed? Well, a lot's changed, unfortunately. We're being forced to do more and more in healthcare, unfortunately, with less and less resources. And you guys heard me say this before, but imagine that you are, working at a factory and you have to, create 100 different parts in your 8-hour shift or whatever. Well, then over the years, that 100 turns into 110, but they actually want you to do it in a shorter period of time or with less resources. And then all of a sudden it turns into 120 and you really haven't gotten a raise yet. And now they're going to take away your assistant that used to get the things for you. And then a couple years later, it goes up to 130 and you have to get 130 these things made. But now you got to do it with the guy that brings over the stuff to you. Like he's gone too now. Like everything's just being stripped down to the screws, literally. That's healthcare right now, except they're not screws. They're people's lives. And we are constantly doing more and more, and there's constantly more and more red tape about this. The red tape in healthcare is insane. And that's why I think people that are like, we should have one government payer system, like, I understand the thought that everyone gets healthcare. I get that, and we could debate that. That could be an entire show. But the amount of red tape and nonsense and inefficiency that the government just injects into healthcare is absolutely jaw-dropping, which is why I don't think a single-payer system will ever work if it has anything to do with the U.S. government. The other thing is that we deal with these frequent flyers in the emergency room. And I know there's plenty of people out there with chronic pain who come at me all the time on social media. Oh, you don't care. You just, you're a jerk. You're a doctor that doesn't care about his patient. Like, we do care. But these people, you can't help some of them. You really can't. And then some of them, by the way, are abusing the ER. That's just a fact. I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying every single one is. Yes, there are frequent flyers that come to the ER that are chronically ill. We see that. We deal with chronic illness all the time. But I spend so much emotional energy and time on these patients. I was talking to my neighbors last night. I'm like, look, if we get a person in there having a heart attack, that person almost never takes any time at all, which is hilariously ironic. You go in there and you tell them, hey, here's your EKG. Looks like you're having a heart attack. This is what's going to happen. You're going to go to the cath lab, and there's going to be a lot of people coming at you all at once. And this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to go to the cath lab, and you're going to be getting blood thinners and whatever. And these patients are usually very grateful, and they're like, okay, all right, that sounds good. Like there's not this push and shove and this, well, do I need to be admitted? Well, I don't really want to be admitted. Or, hey, doctor, I don't think I can go home. Let's talk about why I can't go home. And I have pets at home. And there's a lot of things in there that takes a lot of our emotional energy. So you're taking care of the person that's having the heart attack. You're taking care of a dying kid. And then you have, 10 other rooms available. I did a post recently that went viral on social media that has, I think, close to like 5 million views at this point. And it's it's just me doing a silly video that I do. Selfish plug, follow me any social media platform at Dr. J. Parente. And it basically is just like this perplexed look of, I think it was Mel Gibson, who is just like walking in with this like incredulous stare on his face of like, you've got to be kidding me. And I think I put the tagline of something like, when a family of 3 checks in with a cough that they've had for an hour. Now, to average people out there, they're like, wait a minute, people really go to the ER when they've had a cough for an hour? Like they like can't believe that. I'm like, this happens like literally 100 times a day in like every ER across the country. Like people cannot cope with being sick. Like people want a magic pill. They want it to go away right now. And these people come in droves to the hospital. So it's funny because the reaction to that post was insane. There was a lot of people that were like, oh, I feel you. I'm in healthcare. Like we see this all the time. It's exhausting. You get a family of 7 check in. Someone even said they had a family of 9 check in. I got news for you. If 9 people are in your house are checking in, you either all have better just gotten out of a house fire, have carbon monoxide poisoning, or something along those lines. Because if you're all just there with a cough and cold that you had since earlier that morning, there's a 100% chance that you have a virus. It's just very frustrating. But there were a lot of people that were calling me out and, oh, you don't care. And, oh, sorry to make you do your job. And, the thing that people don't realize, and actually kick the tires on maybe doing an entire show about that post because the comments in that post are so polarizing. We do care. We really do care. But what happens is when you have a family of 7 that checks in for, the cough and cold that started an hour ago, like that day, maybe give it a day, maybe give it a couple days and see how you're doing. Yes, that's resources. Like there's not just this unlimited amount of resources that we can just pass out to every single human that comes through the door. Like there's a reason why waiting rooms are full. There's a reason why people unfortunately, it leads to a lesser level of care. And that's what happens. And we see this. And you guys heard me say this a million times. Healthcare is broken, but so is society. And we're just, trying to figure this part out. So, I do use social media as a form of relief and humor. And yes, I do make fun of patients or a specific situation just like this. And people call me out. But you know what's funny? You know who else I make fun of? My mother. It doesn't mean I don't love her. Shout out, Teresa. I digress. But these are some of the things that lead to physician burnout and nursing too. And unfortunately, is a reason why just about everybody I know that's in healthcare is trying to get out. So at the end of the day, I do love taking care of people. But the part that I love is connecting with people. I like to connect with someone. I like to make them laugh. I like to make them smile. I like to smile at them and help them understand that I'm a real person too. I'm a real human too, and I do care. But I'm going to tell you something. When I have to see 60 or 70 patients in 12 hours with 1 or 2 physician assistants, it's almost impossible to start to, kind of create and facilitate those connections. And that's the biggest disappointing thing about healthcare, at least where I'm at in healthcare, is because I cannot connect with my patients like that when I am constantly sprinting room to room to room to the computer, put in the orders, answer the phone, the pharmacy's on the phone. Like, they have given us so much to do that it's almost impossible to give patients the level of care that they deserve. And that's the part I struggle with internally. I do care. I do want to take care of patients, but it's hard, and they make it hard for us to do that. But it doesn't mean I don't care. We still have that passion. Every healthcare worker I know has that passion that they want to connect with these patients and they want to care for these patients. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of who I am. And I can't thank you guys enough for taking this journey with me and allowing me to open up and explain to you guys who I am, how I became a doctor, and why I became a doctor. Well, thanks everyone for joining me on this very first episode, 2025 Emergency Minute, on how and why I became a physician. If you know someone that you think, hey, maybe this family member, friend of mine would really enjoy hearing this show, I would really appreciate it if you just send it to them. Just send them a link, see if they like the show. You can always leave a review or share anything on social media. I'm on all platforms, and we'll see what happens with TikTok, but at Dr. J. Parente, all across the board. Side note, I am heading to the College Football National Championship today with my 13-year-old son for his birthday gift. So go Bucks, OH! And as I conclude my first episode, as always, peace, love, and happiness to every one of you out there. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for joining us this week on Emergency Minute. Join us next time for more hard-hitting discussions on some of today's issues in healthcare. Don't forget to leave us a review on Spotify or follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente.